The U.S. Trade and Development Agency essentially leads the way for most American companies before they enter international markets, one of which is Africa. And the acting director of the USTDA, Mr. Thomas Hardy, joins me now for a bit of a discussion on what Cyril Ramaphosa called the revival of business relations between South Africa and the American Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Hardy, I thank you for your time. What happened to our business relations before we needed to revive them, as it were?
What I saw last week, spending a week in South Africa, both Johannesburg and Cape Town, is a vibrant U.S. business community. I was fortunate to have lunch in Johannesburg with the leadership, and what I heard about was the investments they're making, the job creation that they're investing in, the job skilling of South Africans, and the manufacturing bases being created in South Africa as a result of U.S. investment. I don't know that we need to revitalize it. What I saw was a vibrant community.
Well, maybe I should have phrased it another way. So I was lucky enough to attend the first installment and the second installment of both the South Africa Investment Conference and also the Africa Investment Forum. I did not see you on the first installments. I saw you on the second installments, together with more of the European contingency, more of the Canadian contingency, and I had to sit back and wonder.
I wouldn't read anything into that. I think that we saw an opportunity. I think what was unique about it this year is we've been investing over a number of years in fantastic infrastructure programs at the earliest stages. And where we are right now is those projects are looking for financing. And the African Investment Forum provided that avenue for us to bring our partners from around the continent to the financiers to make the pitch, to bring the financing into these markets. And then that's what's going to drive economic growth.
Tom, I feel like I know you because we've had a chat before, so I'm going to go ahead and call you Tom. For those who are not lucky enough to be part of the Africa Investment Forum or know what really is this revival, what are the Americans bringing back, not only to South Africa, to the continent as a whole?
What we're bringing, I think, is innovation, an approach to economic development that is based on mutual benefit. I think that U.S. companies are focused on quality, innovative solutions that have been tested and proven in the U.S. model and the U.S. economy, and see a real opportunity to make that leap into Africa. And that is where the U.S. Trade and Development Agency plays such an important role, which is de-risking those investments by U.S. companies that may be looking at Africa as a perceived higher investment risk. And USTDA is able to help de-risk that investment to drive more U.S. companies, smaller businesses that may not be as attuned to the opportunities that exist in Africa. And that was what I saw at the African Investment Forum.
You talk about de-risking, and that is something that African leaders and all kinds of DFIs have been trying to elaborate, that we need to de-risk Africa. Well, at least this year, I heard a different tone. I heard the fact that we need not only to de-risk Africa, we need to de-risk risk, period. But some people went as far as to say that if you're not in Africa, you're not in business. And lately, over the last decade at the very least, we've seen a lot of a push by China to help Africa, not only in its development, but to also help China access all the resources that it cannot really live without. So there's been a beneficial relationship. There has been an overtone of politics when it comes to trade, especially one thinks about the big trade war right now, which involves your government, the American government, as well as the People's Republic of China. We wonder just how much of these trade relations, or at least the better side of them, are dependent on cordial politics?
I think that at its heart, trade is about economic development. And irrespective of what's going on in the trade dispute between the United States and China, what we see is a strong and vibrant U.S. business community that is looking to engage and expand its presence in Africa. And that's where the U.S. Trade and Development Agency is investing, is helping those companies. And I would point out I think it's a perceived de-risking. I think that there is a risk premium, but sometimes that risk premium is more perception than a reality. And that is where USTDA, by making that early investment with grant funding to get companies into this market across Africa, is what's going to lead to greater and closer trade relations.
Tom, you know more about the politics of trade than I have. You've walked the congressional hall. You know more about appetite for different regions in the world. And that plays into the bigger geopolitical narrative of a behemoth, really, like the United States government. But some commentators have gone as far as to say that the Americans are back because they have seen the inroads that China have made, and Africa remains as the last frontier for anyone who wants to take trade seriously, but also that the Americans could not afford to be left exposed in the presence of all that domineering China. Are you playing catch up here? Is Africa the last frontier? Are we the last market?
I would argue that absolutely you're not. The U.S. Trade and Development Agency has invested in Africa. I've been fortunate to work at this agency for 20 years and have been involved in some form or fashion with our Africa program for 20 years. And what we have done consistently is invest, spur greater U.S. company involvement, and seeing tremendous results. And I think I will say right now, just as I would say 20 years ago, it's the right time and it's the right place for U.S. companies to be. And USTDA has been standing behind those companies to get them into Africa. And I don't know that China's involvement, China's expansion on the African continent has changed our approach at all, because we've seen Africa as not the last frontier, but the next frontier.
All right, that's fair enough. That's an interesting way of looking at it. But you were appointed by the US president himself. You are his man, as it were. And therefore, we assume that you guys at least have a vibe, right? That you have a mood that you share. But when it comes down to it, I mean, from a South African point of view and from a greater African point of view, your president has not endeared himself in terms of PR to Africa. The comment that he had on Twitter about South Africa, and while he's going through the expropriation of land, or at least going through the politics of that, was not flattering to South Africa. And it seemed rather that he did not have a man or a woman on the ground to relay the proper situation, and not according to Fox. What is the president, and by the president I mean President Donald Trump's disposition towards Africa?
I think it's best to be seen through the lens of what is the U.S. government doing and the commitment the United States is making to Africa. As I said last week when we spoke at the African Investment Forum, USTDA's program is bigger than it's ever been in Africa. The president signed what's called the BUILD Act, which is doubled the size of the U.S. Development Financing Institution. The U.S. Export-Import Bank is up and open again and is working in Africa. So I think it needs to be seen through the lens of what are we doing? We're having a bigger presence, more engagement, a vibrant U.S. economy. I think we need to look at U.S. engagement with Africa through that lens, which is the practical implementation of our bilateral relationships.
I don't know if you know, I don't know if the news reached the U.S. administrative capital, but South Africa has been also grappling with the issue of spectrum. And in order to release that, to have more 5G capability within the country. And that has something to do with picking a technology partner. I remember Cyril Ramaphosa saying that the American government is only jealous of the relationship that South Africa could have with an entity like Huawei, and how Huawei can give us the benefit of spectrum and help us realize those gains. Did that statement reach the higher up? How does that statement sit now, considering the posture that the US government has towards that entity?
I think that it's missing the larger point, and I think particularly for USTDA. USTDA has invested heavily in IT infrastructure across the continent. Many people don't even know that USTDA was one of the earliest investors in the CCOM's undersea fiber optic cable that's connected all of East Africa with Europe. Today, we're working with the Wireless Access Providers Association in South Africa on expanding the internet connectivity using what is called television white space to try to convert that into high-speed internet access in rural and semi-rural areas. And we're also going to be focused, rightfully so, on helping countries move up from 3G to 4G to 5G. And we've got American companies and technology providers that are hungry for the African market like they're hungry for markets around the world. And USTDA will continue to support those US companies and the technologies that they offer.
Tom, you're a good man, and for your time, especially this early in the morning, I am really, really grateful.